hope everyone's having a lovely day. So, today I, Evelyn Melendez, will be going over learning with you guys. So, what exactly is learning? So, we feel like we learn a lot of stuff throughout our lives, but let's be a little bit more specific about how we learn things. So, learning is the process of acquiring new and relatively enduring behaviors or information change through experience. So, three types of learning are non-associative learning, associative learning, and social learning. So, non-associative learning occurs when we learn about stimulus such as sound, sight, smell, etc. in the real world. So, this is when you learn, for example, what an onion smells like or what pancake smells like. But sometimes we can become habituated. So, habituation is when a stimulus is neither rewarding or harmful, and there is repeated exposure to it, so our behavioral response to it decreases. So, an example of this is during the summer, you might have your AC on and it might make a noise, but after a while, your brain doesn't really register that noise anymore. It kind of just fades away. The opposite of this is sensitization. A tough word to say. An increase in behavioral response after repeated exposure to a stimulus. So the next type of learning is associative learning. Associative learning occurs when we learn about the relationship between stimuli, behaviors, or certain events. And the two types that we're going to address are classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In classical conditioning, learning that occurs when someone learns to link two or more stimuli and anticipate or predict events. In operant conditioning, learning that occurs when a behavior is strengthened if followed by a reinforcer or diminished when followed by a punisher. So, does Pavlov ring a bell? So Pavlov looked at classical conditioning, and he specifically did this with dogs. So before they were conditioned, they were presented dog food, which was an unconditioned stimulus, and then the dogs started salivating or drooling, and this was the unconditioned response because he didn't have to teach them to do this. They just naturally did it. And then a neutral stimulus, such as a bell that was rang, was presented, and the dogs had no response. Then, during the conditioning trials, he made sure to associate or link the neutral stimulus, the bell being rung, with the unconditioned stimulus, the dog food, so that during the critical conditions, every time he rang a bell, the dog would start to salivate. Or in other words, the conditioned stimulus produced a conditioned response. So let's talk about these things. So acquisition is the gradual formation of an association between a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus to produce the conditioned response. So in our example with the dogs, with Pavlov's dogs, this was acquisition because the bell had now an association with the unconditioned stimulus, and then it produced a conditioned response, which was the drooling. Extinction happens when a conditioned response is weakened when the conditioned stimulus is repeated without the unconditioned stimulus. So here, drooling is weakened when the bell is presented and repeated without the food. And sometimes you'll have spontaneous recovery. This is when a previously extinguished response, such as salivation, reemerges after the conditioned stimulus or the bell is presented again. So sometimes these reactions can be generalized. So stimulus generalization occurs when a similar but not identical stimuli is presented to the conditioned stimulus and produces the conditioned response. So an example of this would be if a metronome was used and it also produced drooling in the dogs. So an example of this is little Albert. And I want you to watch the video and then come back. So now that you watch the video, you'll see that little Albert not only had a conditioned response of crying to the white rat, but he also cried anytime anything furry or that resembled and was similar to the rat was presented. So he cried when a rabbit was presented and when like a fur coat was presented. So operant conditioning. So go ahead and watch the video on this. So I want to address a few terms that might be confusing, such as positive, negative, reinforcement, and punishment. So if a stimulus is added, it's said to be positive. If a stimulus is taken away, it's said to be negative. If the behavior increases, that's reinforcement. But if the behavior decreases, then that's considered punishment. So there are different schedules of reinforcement that was brought up in the video. So schedules of reinforcements are the pattern of frequency and timing of reinforcement following desired behavior. So one is continuous reinforcement schedule, and this is when the behavior is reinforced every time the behavior occurs. So an example of this is going to a vending machine. You know that every single time you put in money, you'll get your food out of it. So you know if I put in $1, I will get my chips. Partial or intermittent reinforcement schedule happens when the reinforcing of a behavior happens some, but not all of the time. So an example of this would be playing a slot machine. So sometimes you put your money in the slot machine, you pull down the lever, and sometimes you get a reward, so more money, and other times you don't. Another type is a fixed ratio schedule, and this is when reinforcement is only given after a specific number of responses are made. So an example of this is a rat gets a food pellet every 10th time it pushes the lever, so the ratio is 1 to 10. For variable ratio schedule, reinforcement occurs after an average number of responses, but the reinforcement schedule is unpredictable. So an example is a Girl Scout is selling her cookies in front of a gym and has made a stand. She might sell cookies to the third person, the 8th person, the 9th person, and the 20th person who has come by her stand. The number of people it takes to go up to her stand and make a sale varies, but on average there was a 20% success rate. In a fixed interval schedule, there is reinforcement for a response only if a fixed amount of time has elapsed. For variable interval schedule, the time between reinforcements varies around an average rather than being fixed. So please be prepared to give examples for the different schedules of reinforcement. The next thing we're going to address is social learning. So please watch this video. And then I just want to go over a few terms. So cognitive learning theory is the study of learning that focuses on the thought processes that underlie learning. Latent learning is when a new behavior is acquired, but is not used until a reward is given to display it. So in the video, we saw the case of the rat learning the maze, but when it was given a reward, it was able to complete the maze in a faster time. Modeling is doing a behavior to imitate a behavior that was previously observed. So you can think of it as mimicking. So vicarious conditioning is learning the consequences of an action by watching others being punished or reinforced for doing that action. So if any of us have siblings or little cousins, sometimes we saw them do things and we knew, ooh, they did that and they got in trouble for it, so I'm not going to do that. Or you saw them do something like say please and thank you, and maybe they got an extra candy, and then you decided, oh, since they're getting rewarded for it, I'm also going to say please and thank you. So this ends our module, and thank you so much for spending time with me. I'll see you guys, or you'll hear me next time.